Hello everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host Alan Sakian. Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Nikhil Kashyap.
Hi Alan.
Hello.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to be talking about the power of video games. It's super exciting.
Yes.
At a time when the Game Developer Conference is happening right here in San Francisco, right now.
Just a few blocks down the street.
Yeah, and Nikhil's background's perfect for this. He really cares about utilizing the video game medium to try and better humanity in many different ways, and we're going to be talking about that today. Your background's great. You got a master's degree in game design from Carnegie Mellon, great university. Went to intern with Oculus over at Facebook. Again, awesome, very futuristic stuff in VR. We'll touch on that. And currently game design at Sony Interactive.
Yep.
The PlayStation.
That's my life story.
That's right there. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the roots. So the roots of the story are born in India.
Correct. Yes.
Yes. Where in India? And then how did you go through the process of becoming who you are today? How did you decide to come out? Yeah.
My personal origin story, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, before India, in fact, I had the unique opportunity of kind of growing up in 3 different continents. So a part of my childhood was in the Bay Area. So age 1 to 10 was in Santa Clara, in fact.
Wow. So born in India and then came here 1
Correct.
to 10, Santa Clara.
10 to 12 in the UK, which is the second continent,
Whoa.
and then back to India. So it was definitely an interesting childhood with a lot of varied perspectives. And I guess it gives you a lot of different lenses to look at people and places and culture and interesting things like that. But yeah, growing up, I was always drawn to just art in general. I was a museum enthusiast. Read a ton of books. Yeah, and I think growing up, India is an extremely conservative culture, and a lot of the decisions that you make at the age of 18 aren't necessarily with the thought process of asking yourself what truly makes you happy.
Yeah.
In a sense, that almost came a little bit later.
Yeah.
So a large part of my undergraduate education was just sort of going with the flow and doing the safe things to do. So I got a degree in computer science.
How did you decide to make the move to the US, to Carnegie Mellon? What was the reason that you left India to come here?
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, so I got an undergraduate degree in computer science, which was back in India. And I knew I wanted to be creative. I knew I wanted to work in a medium where I was able to tell stories, to express ideas, emotions,
yes.
I guess evoking emotion in people was ultimately my goal. And that sort of married with the background in computer science, almost sort of the path forwards unveiled itself very organically in a sense. I was a huge video gamer my entire life. And that sort of led to the decision of the United States is where the magic happens, particularly for video games as an emergent medium.
There's that one company that I recently learned about called Tencent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think there are a lot of companies really interested in the Chinese market. That particular organization has holdings in a lot of different American video game studios like Activision, King. So they're taking over the world.
I was reading about what their holdings and it's very interesting. Definitely go to Wikipedia and look up Tencent and just go read about them. I think they're $150 billion a year company, or that might be in yuan, I think, might be. Or it might be, but I might in terms of US dollar or whatever. But they have their hands in a lot of video game stuff as well.
I mean, another sort of interesting thing about China as an emergent economy is that the Chinese economy has, of course, traditionally been manufacturing based, and I think there's a strong desire based on conversations I've had with people for China to be an emergent leader in something new, in something that is a part of the future, as opposed to being a delivery center. So there's a lot of investment in
Yes.
things like virtual reality and emergent technologies in general.
Yes.
Yeah,
So, okay.
exciting times.
So as you're growing up, you mentioned that the culture is conservative, and I also feel like within a lot of the United States, we still don't do a really excellent job at helping children figure out what they're really passionate about at a young age, and then get them into that field of study and that play of life as early. We kind of also push people through this university system, generals, figure it out there, spend lots of money doing that. Some people just don't figure it out there. Some people go into work when they're 22 and they don't like it right away. So there's we got a lot of work to do in that sector to make it better. But you specifically, this also impresses me. You're also an author. This is very cool. Lost in Transition. And so maybe tell us about this. This was very fascinating when I was learning about this from you.
Of course. Lost in Transition is sort of my magnum opus, I suppose. It's the way I like to describe it is Eat, Pray, Love meets Boyhood to a certain extent. So it's a story of discovery, and it's a coming of age story about sexual discovery through the lens of travel.
Yeah.
And it was kind of inspired by two large events in my life. One was, of course, sort of the aspect of growing up as someone who identifies as a gay man in an extremely homophobic country.
Yeah.
That phase of my life was certainly not easy, and I think it left in me a desire to have that story be expressed. But the actual impetus and the trigger to begin penning that novel was when I embarked on this 3-month sort of soul-searching expedition to Europe, and it started off as a side project for the duration of that trip, and it just sort of grew and grew. And I think by the end of that trip, I knew that this was going to be a much larger project than, let's say, a travel blog.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it took around a year and a half to actually go from inception to deal with the publisher.
This coming of age and love and understanding oneself, this across the world, we were just discussing about it through the lens of education. Now we're discussing about it through the lens of sexuality. This was crazy when we were riding together on Monday up from the peninsula to the city, that both in India and in Kenya, there is very strict homophobic cultural norms and policies and law to where you can be imprisoned. This is very important to communicate. Tell us about this.
Yeah, it was an interesting story about, like, I guess how we met. We met in an Uber ride, and it's just funny how fleeting transactions in the city lead to bigger and wonderful things.
Yeah, great friendships.
That's true,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But yeah, so India is surprisingly backwards in a lot of its social values, in terms of, I guess, acceptance of people who are not part of the cultural majority as the public sees us. So by the actual legal section that you're referring to is something that in the Indian Constitution inherited from the British. There was a clause in the Constitution of Britain called Section 377 that was sort of rolled into India's constitution in 1947 when India became its own country. And so by law, individuals can be jailed for as high as, I think, 10 to 15 years if there's photographic evidence produced of homosexual activity. I think the Section 377 has sort of, like, apart from the legal ramifications and just having having that messaging to young boys and girls growing up that your identity is such a flaw in the workings of our society that we can actually put you in jail.
Yeah.
Apart from like the legal implications of that, there's also any notion of a movement in India of an LGBT movement and a community sort of ends up being a conversation about the law, which is in a sense inherently an inhumanistic approach to a movement, and
rather than about thyself.
Correct, exactly.
But it's important to also want to change the law as well. Yeah.
Totally. It's unfortunate how we've been unable to overcome that barrier as of now and sort of elevate that conversation to be a lot more about the individual and the individual's journey through adolescence.
People in the West really need to know about this, really, because a lot of people here don't realize what is given to us, and the simple notion that someone in high school that's figuring themselves out has a photograph snapped of them and then spends 10 or 15 years in jail because of that. That's not a principle that I think that society should be grounding itself into. So, Ron, did you know that about across the world, that there are still places that are really just honing in on people's sexuality and just trying to keep it the way that man and woman only, and that's it?
Yeah, I'm well aware of the problems that we face on this planet, and oppression and something wanting to control us. No doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's awful when you look at it again just from that legal stand, just the legal implications of what could happen to you based on your sexuality.
Yeah.
But having said all that, the other side of that problem is, in a sense, even though we have these sort of draconian laws that exist, like the word gay doesn't still really exist in the conscience of the public.
Yeah.
So when I say homophobic, I guess what the image that is conjured in my head is probably very different than the image that is conjured in someone who grew up in the West.
Yeah.
So when I say homophobic, I mean completely ignorant of the notion of what that means, of the idea of being gay as an important part of one's identity. It is not a part of public discourse in any
Versus
way.
being just completely against it, knowing about it and being against it, versus not even knowing that it could be an identity of somebody's.
Precisely, yeah. And I think what that does is it leaves a certain gap in identity.
Yeah.
There are no sort of cultural and societal inlets for one to truly discover who they are. And that's what the book is about. The book is about like how sort of discovery of new spaces through the lens of traveling can provide those inlets. And how having new experiences with new types of people helps the protagonist embrace himself truly.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way to describe it.
Yeah.
Traveling, experiencing new cultures in the world helps you really identify yourself and figure yourself out. And hopefully writings like this and more will enable us to have more open-minded conversations about where we should head as a society. So this is really cool. I'm really happy that you're an author.
Thank you very much.
Lost in Transition. Available on...
It's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon.in, so the Indian website for Amazon.
Amazon.in.
Yeah, but unfortunately not Amazon.com. I'm working on that. Hopefully we'll get it on Amazon.com very soon.
Awesome.
So if we have anyone who's listening to this right now, give me a call if you're a publisher. But yeah, I just think it's an important story. Not just, of course, because I wrote it, but it's a reflection of a voice that a lot of people need to hear. Like I gave a podcast recently, and I had an extremely heartwarming message that I received on Facebook from a young man. He was 16 years old.
Amazing.
And he was saying, having read the book, that inspired him to come out to his parents. And
Wow.
it was just, it's hard to think of, we all know that coming out is a significant event.
Yeah.
But living in our Bay Area bubble,
Yeah.
I guess over time we've kind of become desensitized to how huge that event can be in a person's life, and to know that I was able to help or assist that process in some ways, very heartwarming.
And there's this crazy opposite to that as well, which so many people talk about, meaning that a parent or parents being super, super hyper liberal and Western will do things like straight up say that, oh, I'm my child's 3 years old, or my child's 5 years old, and they have some sort of a inclination of being, sexually inclined towards boys or girls, or that they have transgender inclinations, and I think that that's also kind of, that's basically on this complete opposite side of the conversation from coming out, which is that you almost guide your child to one of these thoughts. And so I simultaneously just like to bring in that aspect of the conversation, because so many people do bring that up as well. So it's for a longer discussion, but in general, all of these voices at the table, let's make them heard, and let's help children self-actualize into the world through education, like we were describing earlier, as well as through sexuality, and be open-minded.
I can drink to that.
Let's drink to that. We received a package in the meanwhile. That was the knock knock on the door. It's good we got a package in.
Maybe it's a copy
They
of
may
my
not
book.
have heard that. You could have said nothing, and nobody would have known anything.
Well, we got a little USPS package. Exciting. We'll get to open it up, see what it is.
Maybe it's a copy of my book.
It's light bulbs.
It's light bulbs, for our studio. Exciting. So, okay, so that was our bit in Lost in Transition, and now let's talk about. Game design is becoming such and it's good to hear about your background being like art, creativity, wanting to, going to computer science in India and then making the journey to Carnegie Mellon for the master's. Now, as you're going through this process, game design and development, taking this, this road to becoming an elevating medium, not just, we were talking about this earlier, but using guns to kill people and that being it. We're over that. We're so over that. We've moved so far away from that now into completely new and beautiful areas. And we'll talk about maybe more of those areas soon, but let's talk about the actual nitty-gritty engineering side of things quick. So what does one have to learn? So computer science, and then Unity, this whole Unreal is one of the engines that you can use. Like, what are these engines and how do they help in the games? What programming languages are they written in? What aspects of design do you need, like animation design and that kind of stuff? How do these things come together to make games?
So game development as a field and as a practice is unique in that it is a marriage of both sides of the brain, like as one calls it, like left brain thinking versus right brain thinking. So there are many routes into the industry. So we have people who come in from the computer science side. There are a lot of people who come in from a visual art side. That is, they're focused on things like animation, drawing, sketching. Concept arting is an extremely important part of the video game development process in kind of aligning the team's vision on the project. Just having a poster that is kind of like your shining North Star for a project is super important. So there are lots of different routes into the industry. Mine was through computer science, and even though I'm not, so my role is that of a designer. So my job is to kind of find the fun in a nutshell.
Find the
fun.
Find the fun.
Yes, that's the one-line description for my
My
job. A lot of people kind of struggle to wrap their heads around what a designer does, because like most people can sort of think of, okay, the code is written by the programmers and the artists create the visuals. So what does a designer do? And a designer's role is to ultimately think of the player and to make that experience be as enriching as possible. And you can't really theorize fun. Like fun must be experienced in order for a team to then take that vision and run with it. So where my computer science background comes in is in actually building out quick, rough, dirty prototypes, which have no high visual fidelity involved, but just has all of the building blocks of the game sort of stubbed in, so that we can experience it and evaluate it as a team.
Yep.
It's often said that games are iterated into existence.
Yeah, and so you build a lot of those fundamental iterations of it, and then you'll go through a period of testing to see where the fun comes from.
Right.
Yeah, and then you'll potentially combine a couple of those funds together into the product.
Like the way I like to visualize it is when you start off a project, a game can be anything. Like there's an entire universe of a possibility space that is possible. And it's the designer's job to kind of guide the team through that possibility space towards a particular point, helping creative leaders make decisions that are right for the player, that are right for the game, and eventually, hopefully, leads to the best product possible.
And then how do you make these iterations? So what is the code that you're using? And yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Of course. So we, in our studio, we use a game engine called Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is maintained by Epic Games, which is a studio based out of North Carolina, I believe. They're responsible for games like Fortnite, Paragon, very successful studio.
What is this engine? Yeah.
So Unreal Engine supports two different levels of code creation, if you will. It supports C++, which is what our engineers use to handle very low-level hard problems like rendering and how pixels move on screen, really. So that is the deeply technical side of engine development.
And can this be something like these parameters of pixels will move to this location on the plane that we've created, and then you'll guide it there? That's the something. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you can think of it this way. So typically, most game engines offered a sort of a scene creation kit. So places where the actual layout, the environment is laid out, and you kind of have a virtual camera. So you need to now take the virtual camera. You need to take all of the objects that are in the scene, and that needs to translate to an image.
Yeah.
Which is rendering the right objects at the right time.
Yes.
So this is like the deep end of the beast.
It's so cool. So as you're moving across the plane to the location, all of the houses and trees and all these things that are in the environment are changing the way that because you're moving in the screen. What you're seeing is moving. Kind of that virtual camera is being moved to a different location.
Correct. Yeah.
It's so fascinating. I love it.
Yeah. And again, I guess one important thing to remember is games run in real time. So these images that are produced are entirely dynamic because they are controlled by a player. Yep. This is and therefore poses a hugely different set of technical challenges than, let's say, rendering a frame as a Pixar movie would.
Yeah.
Because those are static images that will always be the same, no matter how many times you experience it.
Correct.
So that's sort of like the deep underbelly of the beast, if you will. Fortunately, those are hard technical problems that I don't have to worry about. We have people who are much smarter than myself who work on those.
That engine is just available for people to pick up and leverage. and that whole engine has to be dynamically able to, you know, the player moves here and that shifts, and so all of that math needs to register as it's being processed on the fly like that. It's very fascinating. So
Yeah.
oh, you said there's two engines though, right? Did you say?
Correct.
Yeah.
I said there are two different logic flow creation tools, if you will. One, so all of the things that we just discussed is a part of the engine. So this is something that a developer will probably tweak, but not build from scratch.
Yeah, correct.
Large,
With C++ is how they tweak
correct.
it. Yeah.
C++ is still the primary language that's used for moving pixels on a screen.
Okay.
But my role, on the other hand, is more thinking about the game, right? So we're thinking about, we're scripting things like interactions. That is like, when the player moves their hand in the virtual world, in the real world, how does that map to an interaction in the virtual world? So all of that kind of scripting happens at a higher level through a different kit.
Different logic flow.
Different logic flow.
So there's the logic flow of the Unreal engine and the C++ moving the pixels on screen, and then there's also the logic flow of when you actually trigger a movement on your controller as the user experiencing the process. What do they see on the actual, and how can you maximize that for fun? And yeah.
That's right. Yes. So all of that happens on using what is called a visual scripting tool.
What is it?
With Unreal, it's called Blueprint.
Blueprint.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the way you can like try and visualize it is
cool.
you can think of it as a flow chart. So you have nodes that a designer or a creator can place in an editor, and you have a control flow that triggers through. So you can branch on that control flow. You can loop on that control flow.
Okay.
Things like that.
Nice. It's blueprints, visual editor, nodes. Yeah, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So it's something that a lot of different people can collaborate with easily because it does not require a background in computer science. It's more readable in a sense.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
We were just discussing this before we started. It's a really interesting time for the industry, simply because these tools are now available to the public. So anyone from a small village in India to big cities in Africa can potentially be picking up these tools and begin to express themselves and their idea without having to solve very hard technical challenges and focus on the game.
So then they can use the blueprint. They can use that with an Unreal, and then they would still need a body to be able to get it, the C++ in to actually be able to engineer that into existence. But they can at least get the blueprint out as well.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Now, okay, so with this new transition of games, that was a really good foundation. We have a lot of gaming. You were at Oculus for a while. Now, what are we doing with virtual reality? Because it seems like virtual reality is its own thing, and then video gaming itself is still on the in 3 dimensions, but on a 2-dimensional screen. But then some consoles actually have VR sets as well that you can play with it. And then there's, of course, the VR sets outside of the console play. So then now that's a console itself now as well. So yeah, how do you decide to build in VR or build on the console without VR? And if you decide to build for both, how do you do that? All this.
Yeah. There's a whole load to unpack there for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess broadly you can kind of think of gaming in VR as a very small part of what VR is capable of. So when one thinks of a game, what comes to mind is a sense of being challenged, right? Essentially, where you're given a certain set of tools and you're expected to demonstrate your skill over a series of obstacles that transpire over time. potentially with a narrative or a story in the background. That's usually how people visualize games. But what we're sort of learning with VR is that that structure that I just described to you may not even be the best utilization of that medium. We can build VR games that are deeply challenging to a player and hard games, but there's an entire set of experiences that are a little bit more accessible to people. And foundationally, what has made that possible is because VR gives you a lot of different tools. There's a limited amount that you can do with this controller right here.
Yes.
Right. You can map buttons to certain character actions.
Yes.
And that's sort of the most you can do with the controller.
And because there's also a limited amount of those, but then yes, one of them can open up a wheel of other options and things like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. The point being, there's this separation between the player and the virtual world. Whereas with VR, that integration is just so much tighter.
Yeah.
And that opens up just a completely different set of possibilities in terms of how you would interact with the world.
That's cool. Yeah.
So we can do more than punching and kicking.
Being actually in the virtual world, in there, in 3D, that gives you so much more than being outside of it with a controller, controlling the character inside of it. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. In the industry, we like to refer to them as verbs the player executes below the neck and above the neck verbs. Like below the neck verbs being things like shooting and punching and kicking, and above the neck verbs being things like feeling and emoting, and emotive decision making, if you will.
That's cool. I like that, below the neck and above the neck.
Yeah.
Especially in gaming, that makes a lot of sense. Games are usually separated by that. Like, is it like action and stuff, or is it like close quarter combat stuff, or is it more of the? I actually really thought that what you said at the beginning was really interesting about how you wanted to evoke emotion in people. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I think VR has opened up the medium of interactive experiences to so much more than just being experiences that challenge players and expect a demonstration of a skill set. We can now make experiences that are more about wish fulfillment and fantasy fulfillment.
Yes.
Like, what would it be like to walk in the moon?
Yes.
What would it be like to have a dinosaur roam past me when I'm in a prehistoric land or a prehistoric world?
To go into the molecules or the double helix of DNA and like all this. There's so many cool places that we have the potential for it to take us.
That's right. So I think like VR is very good at transporting you to a different world because it's so experiential.
Yes.
So that's sort of like on the entertainment side.
And the education side, yes.
Yeah, there's an entirely different set of potential VR applications that are not intended with the sole purpose of being entertainment. But we are seeing VR experiences that are now being used to treat symptoms like PTSD, helping patients overcome things like phantom pain in their hand, in their amputated limbs.
The prescriptions from doctors legally to play video games to help with ADHD instead of pharmaceuticals. I mean, this is just mind-blowing. It's Achille Interactive Labs. One of our very close friends, Adam Gazzelli and Eddie Mertucci from the platform. I mean, this is a whole new era. I love it. Games utilized for not just entertainment purposes, but for maximizing human potential in many ways. Yeah,
that's right. There's a tremendous power that comes out of just virtual worlds, and the manner in which we create our virtual worlds will help us behave and perform better in the real world. Is how I like to think of VR and its potentials.
Yes. I'm so interested and excited about that. So why don't you tell us about a couple like projects that are going on? that are within Sony. Can you identify a couple, or can you like identify a couple of them that are happening across the studio? And like, yeah.
Absolutely. One of the games that one of our sister studios is working on is a game called Concrete Genie. This is a trailer that can be checked out on YouTube.
We'll put the link in the bio.
Yeah, and it's a really great example of everything that we were just discussing in terms of elevating games to be a medium that is truly a medium for creative expression. And so fundamentally, in the game, the player controls a young boy who just has a wonderful imagination, and he loves to draw and sketch, and he creates these landscapes in his sketchbook. Mm-hmm. But one fine day, he discovers this magic paintbrush that he can now use to project his imagination onto the real world. So the marks that he was creating on his sketch pads are now these beautiful masterpiece-styled paintings out in the real world. And a step above that is he can now also create these magical creatures that inhabit these environments that he can create. And the underpinning narrative thread to all of this is he's also bullied relentlessly in school. So these creatures that he paints become his virtual companions.
Yeah.
And through interaction with the creatures, he learns to understand his bullies, and his bullies learn to understand him.
Yeah.
And we're all very, very excited to see that game come out, hopefully in the near future.
That just seems like so philosophically driven. It's driven towards evoking emotion of how do kids work together with their bullies to understand one another, and how can one become creative and make their sketch pad come to life, and then that life interacts with the world around you, those creatures. It just seems like, this is the future of video games, is games that are useful. Future of game design is games that are, useful in many ways, past just the idea of the shoulders down.
That's right.
Yeah.
I guess it boils down to just the simple thought that by showing people something, you might forget that, but by interacting with something, by actually practicing something, you're so much more likely to retain that message with you. So interactivity is the key. At least we in the games industry believe that unlocks a well of human experience.
Yeah. Do you and interactivity in general is way more important to repattern behavior than just intellectualizing something when you actually put it into practice experientially. Now, what do you think about, this has been very interesting to me because, things like esports are exploding. Now people are training on certain games, whether it be Super Smash Bros. Or Call of Duty or Halo or League of Legends or Dota or StarCraft. There's so many games that are now being played on the high level of like thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of prize money and sponsorship, and teams are being assembled, sponsors are coming, and all this stuff. And they're playing really high level. I mean, it's turned into kind of like what the high level chess players of the world were doing. But now this is so crazy because as we've seen these reinforcement learning algorithms, these deep neural networks that are able to figure out how to play a game better than humans, happened in chess, happens in Go, happens in Dota now. So this is, again, OpenAI made a bot that beat some of the world's leading players at Dota. It's a very complicated game, multivariate, lots of strategy going on, lots of immediate interactions and analysis of variables that need to be happening. And I'm just curious where you see the future going with where does AI take into account the ability to program a really strong a bot to play in the esports arena, but also we were talking about how things like machine learning can help video game developers and designers get really good at the repetitive things that they need to do. It can just take control of that and finish that, so we can move on to doing the things that we're good at, the creative stuff. It's just kind of those two different like angles to it. Where do you see it? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, again, like whole lot to unpack there for sure. I think it's also worth pointing out like the beauty of interactive media in this regard. Like we were just talking about things like fantasy fulfillment that are not necessarily about challenging players, and like we can, within the same brushstroke, we can also now discuss something that is hyper competitive, and all of these experiences fit within the world of games, and I just think it's beautiful and it's worth calling out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, esports is it's great to see esports kind of coming of age in many ways. I have myself personally never been a competitive gamer, but it's a nut I think a lot of people are trying to crack. Like, how do we create a system that is so deep that it has the staying power that a true sport does? Like a way to sort of think about it is physical sports have existed for so long and have the staying power that they do because the fundamental systems that they are grounded in are systems of human nature, like are systems of the human body and physics, and gravity and things such as that. So and are subject to kind of like infinite variations. The human mind is a very, very important part of a sport. Like an athlete will tell you that it's most of his or her training comes in the mind, and not so much in the body. So can we create game systems and rule sets that are so complex and deep, that almost as deep as the rules of nature, if you will?
Yeah.
So I guess that's one way of looking at it. I think a large part of it is also in terms of setting up infrastructure in order for people to really take this seriously as a sport. I think if you were to poll the public at this point, you would still not necessarily have a lot of people identify an esport as being an equivalent career path or as potentially noble a profession as competing in a real sport. I guess what I'm saying is what the industry desires is kind of the elevation of the stature of esports. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see universities support varsity programs and have scholarships for competitive players and who have achieved success in high school in esports.
Whoa.
So it's fast becoming a legitimate career path.
Yeah.
A risky one, of course. But then again, anything worth doing is risky, is it not?
It is. Which universities are?
I'm not entirely sure. I believe the University of Texas offers UTA. Some universities in California as well. Like I said, I'm not a hyper competitive gamer, but it's starting to see recognition by the mainstream public, if you will.
Cool. What do you think about the potential for artificial intelligence to come in and just can't even tell if you're playing against a bot or if you're playing against a player?
Yeah, we were just kidding how like every esports competition could potentially become a Turing test where you're always guessing whether you're playing a human or a robot.
Yeah.
Humans competing against robots is one way of looking at it. But I guess what I'm personally far more interested in is how do we use AI to enrich non-competitive experiences? We were just talking about VR. This is so incredibly relevant to VR. AI in non-player characters, simply because until now we were viewing AI only in terms of supporting player competence. It's like, how intelligent do we need to make this character to challenge you while he's trying to kill you and you're trying to kill him.
Yeah.
And that was all we needed to worry about when we thought about AI.
It was like dynamically adjusting the level of competitiveness towards the player's skill.
Right. Whereas now with mediums like VR and experiences that are aspiring to be more than simply challenge you on a skill level, like we need these characters in our worlds to have inner lives of their own. Like they must have wants and desires and goals in order for them to be interesting enough that players will care for them. Like it's often said that characters might be VR's killer app. It's like every medium desires this one killer application that sort of propels that medium into the mainstream. And I think there's a growing school of thought that characters are that killer app for VR.
Elaborate a bit more. Teach us about that.
Yeah, well, because VR is so experiential, just the ability to exist in a virtual environment is incomplete unless you have other people and other characters with you. So I guess you can sort of like see that dividing into two genres, if you will. There's social VR, which is oriented around experiences where you are actually with other people and you're experiencing things with a friend.
So I'm a character and you're a character and we're in the same multiplayer
Correct.
realm.
Yeah, so these could just be things like chat halls, or potentially even games where you're both cooperating on a mission potentially. And
that mission could also be work. You could be in like a virtual work environment. You could be working together from across the world, stuff like that. Yeah. Totally.
Enterprise VR is certainly is certainly something that people are trying to start to inculcate into their work routines. But AI-driven characters is sort of almost on the opposite side of what we were discussing. So like, how do we have single-player experiences with characters that you have a relationship with? Like there's a wonderful experience. One of the early VR experiences called Henry, that a lot of people on the team that I work with right now worked on back then, and it's Henry, yeah. And it's a very simple experience about a hedgehog who desires a friend and he likes to hug people.
Sounds like Sonic and Knuckles.
Yeah. I wonder if Sonic and Knuckles was a visual inspiration. Probably not. But yeah, so Henry loves to hug people, but no one wants to hug him back because he's a porcupine with prickly spikes that come out of his body. It's a lovely experience that can be tried on the Oculus Store. But there's this moment where he makes eye contact with you. And that moment was for me the wow moment for VR.
Oh,
and when I knew
it wasn't making eye contact in the world beforehand, and then when you're in the world, then it finally made eye contact with you, and then you looked at Henry.
Yeah.
And that was a whoa moment. Because it's already a whoa moment to look at other humans' eyes.
Right.
You know, sometimes we're not even looking at each other's eyes because it takes a lot of cognitive power to come up with a really complex thought sometimes, and we don't. Looking at someone else's eyes can be a little bit. It's a lot to also perceive someone else's eyes while trying to come up with a thought.
Well, sometimes people don't look into one's eyes because it might be disingenuous coming from them.
That's true.
That is very true.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, as in it's easier to lie when you're not looking at someone's eyes.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
But a lot of, also you have to understand people as well, they're not aware that they're lying, even if they believe in something that might be a falsehood, and sometimes you just have that effect where the whole thing with truth and false is very complex.
Yep.
Where most of us are terribly full of shit.
He's awesome. Ron, what about a virtual world where you're looking at someone's eyes?
That's another thing. Yeah, this could also be, in fact, a virtual world. You know, our soul could be really just operating this meat puppet that I am, And I think that's what's happening to us right now. There's going to be a revelation, so to speak, beyond what might be written in Holy Scripture. But that's what I think is happening right now. What we are creating is only what we have already been. But that's, again, I'm also full of shit in my words, because this is just
Ron
my
went
belief.
down another level, because
Right.
we were created by the universe. Now we're creating universes with these puppets.
It's true. Everything in the simulation series might just be a simulation. So we might not be people at all.
Okay, let's walk let's walk Nikhil down some of our simulation questions. All right, so. Yeah. What do you think is the meaning or the purpose of life?
Wow. Okay, this conversation just escalated very quickly, didn't it? I think the meaning and purpose of the beauty about that question is that it is entirely up to the individual, and like the fact that human beings are able to create purpose from nothing that is inherently given to them is the beauty of our species, is it not? Mm-hmm. So I guess I object to the idea of that question, like of there needing to be a singular defining human purpose, because that is the journey of life, isn't it?
Let's say that there are a couple meanings or purposes to life, the couple that we really need to focus on in order to sustain collectively.
In order to sustain collectively our and to kind of elevate our society, what are the questions that we need to answer?
What would that meaning or purpose be? What would we hone in as the meanings and purposes in order to sustain collectively and elevate the species? Yeah.
I guess the collection of knowledge comes to mind. That is a human purpose that is inherently human. Like, I think there's a curiosity drive that exists in all of us, and is a useful purpose for us to share, because it then allows us to define our own purposes. Assembling a body of knowledge, and a body of knowledge that encompasses reality, and being able to explain our reality, I suppose, I think opens people up to then use that knowledge to define their purpose.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. We create this mass of wisdom and knowledge, intelligence that we now have, and then we can tap into that and use it to find meaning and purpose individually and collectively. Okay.
Yeah.
How about, what is something that you believe that nobody else believes to be true, or very, very few people believe to be true?
What do I believe that very few people believe to be true? I suppose I don't necessarily know if this is a viewpoint that a lot of people share or do not share, but the idea that fantasy can make a better reality, I guess.
Yeah.
I think people separate out those two. I don't necessarily know if people believe that their fantasies and their imaginations hold any sway on their real lives, or should hold any sway on their real lives. And I think being the power of the imagination, I suppose, is one way of describing that. But yeah, I suppose the idea that your personal fantasies will help make your reality better, if you will.
I do, and it's very fun that it loops right back into what we were talking about with game design. Totally, it does. Not only the fantasies that our mind comes up with, but that we construct. And it really works with engineering software. Ron and I are going to the engineering software conference, the Congress on the Future of Engineering Software, COFIS. engineers and designers that use software to simulate something in a virtual world gives them tremendous insight into what it will actually tangibly feel like, operate like in the real world, which is why we do it in the virtual world first and make all the tweaks, and then we put it into the real world, so that way you don't put it into the real world and it falls apart or what have you.
Yeah, totally. Well, I guess that's certainly one way of looking at it. But I guess what I was trying to say was a little bit more encompassing than necessarily engineering or virtual reality. But the idea that your inner models of your mind and the models of reality that you hold can help transform the world. So like your personal fantasies. By fantasy, I suppose I mean your version of the world, or the version of the world that exists in your brain. When that has a voice, and when you are able to express that, that can then transform other people's reality.
Exactly. So the vision that you have of a better future, to be able to then go and build it, execute it into the world, can help other people live a healthier and happier, more fulfilled life. So to take what is forming inside of this mind so often, I can't even go anymore without looking around me on the streets wherever I go and think about how can I make these systems better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, how about are we alone in the cosmos?
Wow. Are we alone in the cosmos? I think that's a question that I don't know if I'm super qualified to answer, but it seems like my understanding of the body of science that exists right now is we actually don't have we don't have tools to answer that question yet, because that in a sense that is a probability assessment of the origins of life. And if we understand the origin of life in our planet, we can then attempt to go about ascribing that probability in different environments, in different stars and galaxies in the universe. But we don't really know the answer to that question.
We kind of have that a little bit with the Drake equation, these different formulas where we can put together the average amount of Earth-like planets that have formed around star systems, and then whether or not they've hit these different, like asteroids have hit them, or if maybe only microbial life developed and nothing more. Yeah, there's all these different.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem that a lot of those models is they all assume that life must be organic, right? Like
what do you think life could be like if it's not organic? What would it be like?
We're now like deep in simulation conversations, I guess. I'm sure there are ways non-synthetic life could, or rather synthetic life could exist and be non-organic.
Tell us, what do you envision it like?
What do I envision it like? Well, I mean, we were discussing simulations in a humorous manner, but it is entirely possible for us to, if we have the computational ability and if we have an understanding of the human mind, then we could potentially simulate a human brain.
You're leading us into the next question.
Oh, is that true?
Which is, are we in a computer simulation?
Well, I guess if we had the tools to answer that question, then a lot of other things in the world would be solved already, I suppose. Are we in a computer simulation? I don't know, I guess. I wish I suppose, I guess I don't know if that's an important question, because answering that question results in a better reality in no way. So I'm more interested in like bettering our world than answering whether or not we're maybe we are a simulation, but does it matter? We are still going to care about the same things. Does that make sense?
It matters to expand one's awareness about the possibility. The final yes or no also matters, but that's a longer conversation. But to expand one's awareness around the conversation is really important. Now,
so you're asking me whether I take the red pill or the blue pill, essentially, is the question, or is that your next question? Is that literally your next question?
Those are great answers to that question.
Yeah. Red pill, red pill, red pill, red pill. Okay, how about last thought is, what are your thoughts about the consciousness or the soul moving from body to body over time, in the past, in the present, in the future? What are your thoughts about that?
So I suppose this is a question on a potential afterlife, and whether the soul is a transcendent property that exists outside of the body.
That's a great way to phrase that question. Is the soul transcendent property? That's a good way to phrase it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's any scientific evidence that suggests that it is. I think if you were to hold that belief at this point, then you would be, that belief would exist on faith. It wouldn't necessarily exist based on any evidence.
Except maybe some feeling, though, right? Do you get these feelings of living in past bodies?
Feelings of living in
past bodies.
I have no idea what those feelings might be. I think in many ways there's
describing an experience to you from 100 or 500 or 1,000 years ago. They're just describing an experience to you. You're reading about it. You're watching it. You're living in it virtually, and then you're realizing that, wow, I lived in those shoes. Whether it be the collective consciousness or the individual consciousness, but
wow. That sounds like an experience that I'd love to have. So if you could educate me about your life 5,000 years ago, maybe I would discover mine. But I guess the way I view it is this. In many ways, we like asking these questions because we don't fully trust that the beauty of the human experience can be contained within this human brain. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would challenge that assumption. It's like, why is it not? Is it entirely not possible that that everything we experience and all of the wonderful things that happen to us throughout life can all stem from just simple neural mechanisms that are explainable?
Yep.
Like, do we need to impose fantasy? Like, do we need a higher explanation? Isn't it good enough to understand the human brain? And would you potentially believe that everything that human beings experience just comes from the brain, including the concept of a soul?
Probably some from the heart, maybe even some from other organs inside of our body. And then furthermore, where else does the experience of the soul come from? And that's another one of our questions about consciousness, about it being localized here in the body or if it's in other places as well. So, wow, what a great session, what a great conversation. It's been such a pleasure. Nikhil,
Likewise.
thank you so much.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex.
And we covered so much, everything from loss and transition, all the way to the future of video games and why it's so important to understand all of the potential that video game design and development has in useful applications in today's world, in virtual reality, AI. So, and our simulation questions at the end. What a blast!
It's true, and
Thank
of course,
you.
with the potential that we are all living in a video game right now.
Yeah, exactly. And the creators the creators are really observing us and loving the process of seeing what their creation is doing. So are we going to nuke ourselves to death, or are we going to sustain and colonize the cosmos? Let's do the latter, please. So, all right, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you had a good time, please give us a like, comment below your thoughts about what was going on, subscribe, share the content with other people, and make sure to become a patron. We have a Patreon account. You get great exclusive benefits of becoming a patron, supporting our studio, supporting our guests, all this good stuff. We'll be announcing our live event coming up either in April or May soon, so stay tuned. That's going to be exciting. Ron Vargas, thank you, our producer and director, and to our family offices that support us as well. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.